They say the first cry of a newborn is the loudest sound in the world, but that night, it was the sound of a door closing that I remember most. It was raining. Not a soft, sentimental rain, but the kind that beats against the glass like an argument, demanding to be heard. The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and lilies from a forgotten bouquet. I remember gripping the cold railing of the hospital bed, the sheets sticking to my legs, my breath breaking into uneven gasps that didn't sound like mine. He was there at first, David, pacing by the window, his hands buried in his pockets, the way he did when he didn't know what to do with his fear. He was always better at fixing broken things than facing them. I remember the way the light flickered against his face, the mixture of love and panic in his eyes. "You'll be fine," he kept saying. "You're strong, Anna. You've always been strong." And I, between the contractions, between the waves of pain that blurred my sight, tried to believe him. I reached for his hand once, but he was already walking toward the door, his voice shaking. "I just need to make a call," he said. "It's about the car. I'll be right back." It wasn't the first lie between us. It would be the last one he told to my face. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time in pain stretches like glass, transparent and infinite until it shatters. I remember the nurse asking, "Where's your husband, dear?" in that pitying tone that made me want to disappear into the bedsheets. "He'll be back," I whispered. But the words cracked halfway through. He didn't come back. When Lily came into the world, the storm had softened to a drizzle, like the sky had spent itself. Her cry, thin, determined, cut through the silence of the room. I remember reaching for her, the nurse's hands guiding mine, the warmth of her body against my chest. I remember whispering her name for the first time, over and over, until it became a prayer. "Lily," I said. "Lily, you're here." But even then, in that moment that should have been perfect, I kept glancing at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for his voice to break through the sterile light and say, "I'm sorry I was gone." I didn't mean to miss it. Instead, the hallway remained empty. It was almost dawn when I saw him again. Or rather, when I thought I did. The nurse had stepped out, and I was half asleep, my daughter swaddled beside me, her breathing a rhythm I'd already memorized. The door creaked open, and I looked up, expecting him, but it wasn't David. It was Father Thomas. He looked smaller than I remembered, his dark coat heavy with rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held something in his hand, a small, sealed envelope. "Anna," he said gently, stepping closer. "He asked me to bring this to you." I blinked, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion and disbelief. "Where is he?" I whispered. The priest hesitated. His eyes, those kind, patient eyes, flickered to the envelope, then back to me. "He left it with me last night, said I should come when it was time." "When it was time?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He just placed the letter on the bedside table and looked at the sleeping baby. "She's beautiful," he said softly. He would have wanted to see her. Would have. The words hit me like a second contraction, one that tore not through the body but the heart. "Father," I said, my throat dry. "Is he coming back?" He sighed. "I don't know, child." "But he said you'd understand when you read it." I stared at the letter for hours before I touched it. I was afraid of it, afraid of the truth that might live inside. My hands were trembling when I finally broke the seal. The paper was damp, the ink slightly smudged, as if the words themselves had tried to escape. It wasn't long, not even a full page, but every sentence burned itself into me. "Anna, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I can't explain everything, not yet, not in a way that won't hurt you more. But there are things I must face, things I've hidden from you and from myself. This isn't about love. Please believe that. I love you more than I ever knew I could. But there's a debt I owe, not of money, but of truth. And until I pay it, I can't be the man you think I am. You and our child deserve better than the lie I've been living. Don't wait for me, but don't hate me either. One day you'll know why. Forgive me." David. When I finished reading, the world felt tilted. The walls swayed, The lamp hummed louder than before, and the only sound that made sense was Lily's quiet breathing. I pressed the letter to my chest and tried to feel something. Anger, grief, relief. But all I felt was emptiness, wide and cold as the rain outside. Father Thomas came back later that morning. He didn't ask if I'd read it. He just stood at the foot of the bed, his hat in his hands, his face heavy with something like guilt. "I saw him," he said quietly. "The night before. He came to me after Mass." "Why?" He asked for confession. I looked at him sharply. "And you can't tell me what he said." He shook his head. "Not unless he gives me permission." "But, Anna..." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't make me bleed. He was afraid, not of you, of something else. Something else. The phrase haunted me. That night, after the nurse dimmed the lights, I held Lily close and watched the rain slide down the window. Each drop traced a line down the glass, disappearing into the dark. I thought about the letter again, about the word forgive. Forgive what? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing at the door, looking back once before stepping into the storm. I imagined him walking through the wet streets, his jacket soaked, his hands shaking, the letter already written and sealed in his pocket. I imagined him hesitating, maybe turning once, maybe whispering my name. But imagination is mercy. Reality was simpler. He had walked out on me, on us. And yet, even as I whispered that truth to myself, I couldn't hate him. Not completely. Because love, when it's real, leaves behind too many echoes to be buried in one night. At dawn, the nurse brought me coffee and said the priest had come again. "He left this," she said, placing something on the table. It was a small silver cross, the kind David used to wear. On the back, engraved in letters so small I almost missed them, were the words, "For her protection." I stared at it until the coffee went cold. Then I slipped it around Lily's tiny neck and whispered, "Your father sent it." It was a lie. But some lies are softer than truth. Morning nurses have a way of speaking that makes everything sound survivable. They said rest now, as if the body could be trusted to keep its promises, as if sleep could be scheduled between feedings and the ache under the ribs where the word gone had nested. I tried to follow their instructions like commandments, but the letter on my bedside table refused to be ordinary. It glowed in my mind even in the dark, the smudged ink shimmering like a bruise. By mid-afternoon, the maternity ward had learned my new name, the woman whose husband stepped out during contractions and didn't step back in. They didn't say it loudly. They said it by remembering to be too kind. The way the cup of tea arrived already sweetened, the way the curtains were closed before I asked, the way the questions slid past the place that hurt. Pity is a soft knife. You mistake it for mercy until you realize it cuts the same. They brought Lily in, buttoned into a yellow sleeper too big for her. The nurse laid her on my chest, and for a while, every sound that wasn't her breathing fell away. I could feel the rhythm of her, the small, steady insistence of a life that hadn't read the letter and didn't know what it meant to be left. "Do you want to try the first bath?" the nurse asked later, as if offering me a kind of absolution. "I'm afraid I'll drop her," I said. "You won't," she said, and because some women have been training their voices for their entire lives to be believed, I believed her. We washed Lily in a shallow porcelain basin while the rain stitched the window in straight lines. She didn't cry. She stared at the light as if learning it by heart. The nurse showed me where to hold the back of her head, how to pour water so the shock never gets a chance to win. "It feels worse when you hesitate," she said. "Go steady or the cold wins." Her words landed like advice for more than a bath. Father Thomas appeared again around dusk, the hem of his coat damp, that same carefulness sitting in his eyes like a traveler too polite to ask for a chair. He stood for a long time looking at Lily, then at the cross he'd left that morning. "It was his," he said. He wanted her to have it." "You keep saying wanted," I said, "as if he's already a ghost." The priest didn't flinch. Priests learn early how to let grief throw stones without throwing them back. "I don't know how long he'll be gone," he said, but he insisted on the letter, on me bringing it when she was here. "Because I wouldn't have read it otherwise," I said, and the realization stung. He knew me well enough to plan my refusal. Because, the priest murmured, he owed you words, even if he couldn't carry them himself. I could have asked then, pressed my questions against his vows until something cracked. But I have never been good at asking for pain on purpose. Will you baptize her? I heard myself say instead. He glanced up, startled by the sudden practicality of it. Of course, when you're ready. We can do it now, I said, before the town starts counting who came and who didn't. Then softer, before news finishes what it started, he nodded. I'll speak with the nurse. When we stood near the small chapel at the end of the corridor, a room of pale wood and a window that never learned how to open, Father Thomas placed his hand over Lily's head and spoke the old words in a voice that never learned to dramatize. He said her name like a promise. I held the cross while the water touched her hair, a handful of drops that found their way along her temple and into the future. For a second I could pretend this was how it would have been anyway. A priest, a prayer, a husband's hand at my back. Some lies aren't the kind you tell. They're the kind you allow to breathe for one last minute so they can lie down and die without a scene. When it was over, he lingered. There's something I can tell you that won't hurt my vows, he said, careful, choosing each word like a fragile thing. He came troubled. Not angry. Troubled the way a man is when he recognizes himself for the first time and doesn't like what he sees. He asked me for a pen in a quiet pew. He wrote for a long time. Then he told me to hold the envelope until I heard she'd delivered. He hesitated. He wept, Anna. I don't know if it makes anything better. But he wept. It didn't. And it did. Grief is greedy. It eats contradictions and calls them breakfast. After he left, the corridor breathed around me. Nurses wheeled small miracles past my door like tea trays. Somewhere down the hall, a woman laughed the kind of laugh that only comes out on the other side of terror. I pressed my thumb against the letter's fold until the paper softened. A debt of truth, he'd written. The words scratched at me from the inside. I replayed our years together the way you replay a song for a lyric you're sure you misheard. I found the seams. The times he'd said he was late because of traffic on mornings without traffic. The way he'd over-polished his apologies when forgetting a date. The sudden hunger for night drives in a town that sleeps by 9. None of it belonged to betrayal yet. All of it belonged to a man learning how to step into a shadow. By the time they wheeled us out 2 days later, the storm had rinsed the air clean. I wore the cardigan my mother had sent with a note that tried too hard. You are not the first woman to do this alone, she had written, as if the fact were comfort. People stood at the hospital entrance the way people do in small towns when news needs a place to watch itself. Mrs. Keller from the bakery brought a bundle of rolls I couldn't hold and a rumor I didn't ask for. The headmistress from the school made a joke about Lily already having my serious brow. She looks like someone who won't put up with nonsense, she said. And beneath the humor I heard the version for which I owed her thanks. You can do this. Even if you don't know it yet. At home the rooms had learned new echoes. The kettle sounded like someone else's house. I laid Lily in her basket and folded blankets that did not need folding, just to give my hands work that didn't involve admitting anything. David's sweater was still on the chair. Ridiculous. How an object can hold the same air as a person. I pressed it to my face and inhaled until the past stopped performing mercy and went back to being a fact. The first night I fed her by the window, we watched the streetlight build a small moon on the pavement. I tried to make a list of the practical things. Register her birth, thank the nurse who pretended not to notice when I cried into the hospital soup, schedule the midwife's visit. Instead, I made a list of sentences I could say to strangers. He had to leave on short notice. Family emergency. We'll be fine. He'll be back. The last one was the lie that fit best in my mouth. It tasted like sleep when you need it. It tastes, still, like a prayer I don't believe in, but want the world to overhear. The town took the hint, or took their own. Within a week, I was the woman with the brave mouth. Windows opened when I passed, not because anyone needed air, but because curiosity requires oxygen. I learned to accept casseroles as if receiving absolution. I learned to answer the question, and the father, with a smile precise enough to end the conversation, but not precise enough to start a war. Father Thomas came by on Thursdays with bread and a book, and the talent of never sitting until I said sit. The letter found its drawer. Third one down in the kitchen, where string and tape and batteries live, things you only need when something else needs fixing. I told myself I'd stop opening it. I didn't. On nights when Lily finally surrendered to sleep and the house forgot to creak, I'd unfold it and look for a new sentence. The words did not rearrange. They never do, no matter how long you stare. Still, something shifted each time. The way my hands trembled less, the way guilt moved from a knife to a dull spoon, the way rage visited like weather instead of a religion. When my milk came in, I wept. Not because of pain, though there was that too, but because the body had chosen to keep making offerings even after being told no. "You are not alone," it said in the blunt grammar of biology. "I will carry what you cannot." I whispered thank you to a chest that had never asked for gratitude. On Sunday, I dressed Lily in white and went to church because the town would count if I didn't. The hymn sounded older than my fear. Father Thomas's homily was about Joseph, how some men are remembered not for what they begin, but for what they stay to hold. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the cross, the way priests do when they need to say a hard thing without hurting the person they're saying it to. After, by the stone basin where someone's grandmother had once scolded us for running, he said, "You don't have to come every week." "I know," I said. And then, because I needed to borrow the language of institutions for an hour, "We will," he hesitated. "When you're ready," he said. "I can share what's mine to share. Not the confessional, but the human things." "The human things," I repeated. And for the first time since the letter, I felt something like anger that wasn't flame but coal. Were any of the human things about me? Some, he admitted. Most were about himself. "Then he told you the truth and asked me to live with the echo." Father Thomas closed his eyes, the way men of mercy pray when they have nothing useful to add. "He asked me to tell you that he loved you, and that the truth he owed wasn't punishment. It was a road." "A road to what?" I asked. "To coming back," he said. "Or to staying gone without lying about why." At night, when the house learned our new schedule, I began a habit I'd only tell someone years later. I wrote letters. Not to David, to Lily. Simple ones, dated in the corner, folded small, tucked in the same drawer as his. "Today you smiled and it looked like sunrise deciding to show up anyway. Today the kettle whistled and I didn't flinch. Today someone said your name and it didn't break me open." I told myself I was making a record for her. I was making a map for me. Weeks arranged themselves into a life. The pram learned the route to the bakery by heart. The cat who belonged to no one adopted our steps. The midwife asked gently whether I'd thought of telling my mother, and I said yes because it was easier than saying not yet. On a Tuesday, a letter came from the electricity office with David's name on it, and I took a breath and changed it to mine. On a Thursday, Father Thomas brought a photograph in a folded paper. David at a parish picnic last summer, his hand on a boy's shoulder, laughing with the kind of ease that should have warned me. "He left the print in a book," the priest said. "It fell out when I returned it to the shelf." I didn't go looking. I believed him, because he had the face of someone who had practiced telling the truth even when it was useless. I slid the photograph under the edge of the drawer that already held the letter. I did not look at it again that week. I learned how to rock a stroller with my foot while buttering bread with one hand. I learned the exact distance between his surname and mine, and decided which one my daughter would carry when people asked. I learned to sleep in increments and call it good. And then one night, very late, when the street had emptied of every kind of sound but our own, I heard myself speak out loud in the dark. "You can love a man who leaves," I said to no one, "and still not let him define the door." Lily exhaled in her basket as if agreeing. I opened the drawer and took out the letter, and for the first time, I read it without shaking. The ink hadn't changed, but I had. It said, "Don't wait for me," and for the first time since the storm, I didn't argue with the paper, still. I left the light on, and in the morning, I put the kettle on, and the world began again. Not with forgiveness, not with certainty, but with the small, ordinary courage of choosing breakfast when you still want answers. I tied the cross more snugly at Lily's neck. I folded the photograph into a book and pretended I'd forgotten which one. I looked at the church spire and decided I would go see Father Thomas on a day when the sky didn't look like it wanted to break. There would be more letters. Not from David, not yet, but from the life I was already writing without meaning to. There would be questions that would sit on the table between us like bread. There would be a confession that did not belong to the booth. But before all that, there was this: a quiet kitchen, a child that breathed, and a woman learning to tell the easiest lie without letting it hollow her out. "He had to travel," I told the florist when she asked why I chose lilies. "He'll write." She nodded and wrapped them in paper that sounded like rain.
Children notice what silence hides. Lily was 5 when she asked the first question I couldn't answer. We were sitting by the window, folding paper cranes out of old church bulletins. The light outside was pale and lazy, the kind that belongs to afternoons too quiet for their own good. She lifted one of the cranes, squinting as she studied it. "Why don't I have a father like the others?" I froze. The question was small, but it landed like thunder in a room that had learned to fear echoes. I tried to smile, though my fingers betrayed me, crushing the fragile wing I'd been folding. "You do," I said carefully. "He's far away." "Far away where?" I hesitated, searching for a distance that could contain a lie. "Somewhere warm," I said. "He travels." She nodded, but not the way a child accepts an answer. She nodded the way an adult humors one. As Lily grew, so did the weight of that unspoken absence. She was gentle like her father, but sharper. She noticed patterns in people, how Mrs. Keller's voice softened when she spoke of her husband, how Mr. Renner's eyes darted to his ring when he mentioned his wife. At 7, she drew pictures of families with 4 figures instead of 3. One day, she brought one home from school. A house with a red roof, smoke curling from the chimney. A woman with long brown hair stood by a window, a little girl beside her, and on the opposite side of the yard, a man drawn in pale pencil, almost erased. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to him. She looked up, her face calm. "You tell me." That night, I cried quietly by the sink, my tears lost in the sound of the running tap. Time, when lived with secrets, doesn't flow, it circles. By the time Lily was 10, the rumor of David's disappearance had settled into town legend. People spoke of him the way they speak of ghosts, with curiosity wrapped in caution. Father Thomas still visited, less frequently now, though his presence always brought with it the taste of unfinished truth. He had aged, his once dark hair streaked with silver. I had too. One evening, after supper, Lily found an old photograph in a box I had carelessly left in the attic. It showed David and Father Thomas standing outside the church, laughing at something beyond the frame. She came downstairs clutching it like proof. "Who's this man with Father Thomas?" she asked, her eyes wide. I froze. My mouth formed his name before my mind could stop it. "That's your father." She looked at me, studying my face the way she studied weather, trying to predict the storm. "Then why did he never come back?" She whispered. Her words hit harder than any slap. "He couldn't," I said softly. "But he's alive. I don't know. Do you still love him?" Her question was so clean, so pure, it cut through the years of practiced calm. "Yes," I said finally, "but love isn't always enough to stay." She turned away, holding the photograph close to her chest. "Maybe it's enough to return," she said quietly, and left the room. That night I couldn't sleep. I went to the drawer where I had hidden David's letter. It was still there, soft from years of unfolding, the creases thin as veins. I read it again, but it had lost none of its weight. There's a debt I owe. Not of money, but of truth. Truth. The word burned brighter now that Lily had begun asking for it. By dawn, I decided to visit Father Thomas. The church hadn't changed much in 10 years. The same wooden pews, the same scent of incense clinging to the air, the same patch of sunlight that found its way through the stained glass like grace itself. He was there, as always by the altar, arranging flowers. He looked up when he saw me. "Anna," he said softly, "it's been a while. I need to talk." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. "Is it about him?" I handed him the letter. It's about the truth he owed. He read it again, though I could tell he didn't need to. He knew every word by heart. "Lily found his picture," I said. "She's asking questions I can't answer." Father Thomas exhaled slowly. "Perhaps it's time she hears what can be told." "What does that mean?" I asked sharply. He hesitated. "David came to me the night before you went into labor. He was broken. He spoke of things he couldn't carry anymore. Guilt, fear, something from before your marriage." My heart hammered in my chest. "Tell me." He lowered his voice, his eyes wet with memory. "He discovered something. A truth he believed would destroy everything. He told me he couldn't stay to watch you suffer for it. What truth? I demanded. What did he find? I can't say all of it, Father Thomas said, his voice cracking. But it wasn't betrayal, Anna. It was love twisted by fear. Fear of what? Of what love can forgive. I stood abruptly, the weight of his words crushing. You're protecting him. Even now, he shook his head. I'm protecting what's left of you both. The silence stretched. I looked at the crucifix above the altar, at the carved figure suspended in surrender. And for the first time in years, I felt anger toward something higher. He left me in labor, I said. He left his child. I know, Father Thomas said quietly. But he didn't leave without confession, and he didn't leave without love. I turned to go, but he called after me. Anna, there's one more thing. I stopped. He asked me to keep something for him. I was told to give it to you when I believed the time was right. He opened a drawer in the vestry and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was another letter. I stared at it, my breath gone. You kept this all these years? He nodded. Because it wasn't finished. Because neither were you. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Lily asleep upstairs, the unopened letter between my hands. The house felt alive, the air charged with something ancient, the same current that hums before a storm. I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed it beside the first one, their edges touching like two wounds trying to close together. I whispered to the dark, If you loved me, tell me why you left. The silence that answered wasn't empty this time. It was waiting. The unopened letter sat on the table for 3 days. I moved it from place to place as if changing its position might change its contents. Morning light touched it. Afternoon shadows stretched over it. And still I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. The paper looked almost alive, the way guilt sometimes does when it's waited too long to speak. On the 4th night, Lily found me staring at it. She was barefoot, her hair tangled from sleep, holding her blanket like a question. Is that from him? She asked. Yes, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Then why haven't you opened it? I wanted to tell her that some truths only exist as long as they're still folded. That once you open them, they stop being mystery and start being evidence. Instead, I said, because once I do, everything changes. She thought for a moment, then climbed into my lap and whispered, Maybe it needs to. When she went back to bed, I lit a candle. The flame trembled as if it too was afraid. I ran my finger along the seal, felt the rough edge where wax met paper, and finally tore it open. Inside was a letter dated 2 days before Lily's birth. Anna, if Father Thomas has given you this, it means you found the strength I couldn't. I'm sorry that what I have to say will hurt. But silence has its own cruelty, and I've given you enough of that already. The truth I owe isn't about money or crime. It's about love and the way it can rot when built on lies. Years ago, before you and I were married, you told me about the child you lost. You said he wasn't mine, but that you wished he had been. I said it didn't matter. I told myself love could erase what came before. But I lied, to you and to myself. He wasn't just any man, Anna. He was my brother. I didn't know until the week before you went into labor. I found the old letter you'd written to him. It fell from a book while I was packing the hospital bag. I read it, every word. The tenderness, the regret, the way you said his name. It broke something I didn't know could break. But what hurt most wasn't that it happened. It was that you carried that loss alone, and I'd built my life beside a secret too sacred to speak of. I went to Father Thomas that night because I couldn't hate you. I tried, God knows I tried, but every memory I had of us was honest, even if our beginning wasn't. You never lied about your love for me. You just believed, maybe rightly, that I'd never survive the truth. So I did what cowards do when they love too much. I ran before I could stay and become the man who reminded you of your sin. I wanted you to start again without my shame breathing beside you. If there's a God that forgives men like me, I hope he'll tell you I never stopped loving you. And that I was there, outside that hospital, when you screamed our daughter's name into the world, I left because I thought leaving was mercy. I see now it was punishment. For both of us. Forgive me if you can. David. When I finished, I felt my lungs refusing to obey. The candle flickered and spat, sending smoke in thin gray ribbons toward the ceiling. My hands trembled, not from anger this time, but from something older, recognition. The letter didn't rewrite the years we'd shared. It revealed what had been hiding beneath them. I remembered that winter night so long ago before we married. The snow had fallen so thick it silenced the village. We sat by the fire, and I had told him about the child I'd lost, a brief, trembling confession wrapped in tears. I hadn't said who the father was. I couldn't. David had taken my hand and whispered, "It doesn't matter. The past ends here." But it hadn't ended. It had just gone underground, waiting to bloom as ruin. The next morning, I went to the church. I didn't send word. I didn't knock. I found Father Thomas kneeling near the altar, whispering something to the empty pews. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "You read it?" he said. I nodded. "You knew." He didn't deny it. He told me everything. He was shattered, Anna. I thought he might do something worse than run. And you let him leave? He looked down at his hands. He begged me to. He said if he stayed, he'd destroy you both. He destroyed us anyway. Father Thomas flinched as if the words themselves struck him. He thought he was saving you. He truly believed that walking away was love. I laughed, a hollow, broken sound that startled even me. "And what about you, Father? Did you believe that too?" His eyes met mine, full of something like grief. "I believed he wasn't the only one running from the truth." "What does that mean?" He hesitated. The air between us thickened. "After he left, he wrote again," he said finally. "Not to you, to me. He asked me to watch over you, not as penance, but as friendship. He said I was the only man he trusted with your name. Something inside me shifted. And you did. You watched me. You carried his guilt for him. I carried yours too," he said quietly. "Because I forgave you long before you forgave yourself. The tears came before I could stop them." "You had no right." "I know." We stood in silence, the old church breathing around us. Dust drifted through the stained glass light like falling forgiveness. Finally, he said, "There's more." I looked at him sharply. "More?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, older and thinner than the others. "He sent this from abroad, a year after he left. I never showed you because I didn't think you were ready. Now, maybe you are." The paper was brittle with age. I unfolded it carefully, expecting another apology. Instead, it contained a single line. "Tell her the truth doesn't live in shame. It lives in what she raises from it." I stared at the words until they blurred. "What does that mean?" Father Thomas smiled sadly. "It means he knew. He knew Lily would be your redemption long before you did." When I returned home, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if something had finally been exorcised. Lily was sitting at the table, sketching with a pencil. She looked up as I entered. "Did you find out?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "I did. Was it bad?" "No," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "It was just human." She nodded slowly. "Will you tell me?" "Someday," I said, "when it won't feel like reopening a wound." She reached out and took my hand. "Then we'll wait together." That night, I went to the river behind our house. The moonlight stretched across the water like a path. I held both letters, the one that broke me and the one that began to mend, and watched their edges curl in the damp air. I didn't burn them. I didn't bury them. I just let them fall into the current, the ink bleeding like forgiveness. As they drifted away, I whispered, "I forgive you. And I forgive myself." For the first time since that night in the hospital, I meant it. 20 years is a long time to carry a silence, long enough for grief to turn into habit, for the edges of memory to soften into something almost tender. Long enough for a daughter to grow from a child asking why into a woman who already knows. By the time Father Thomas came to my door again, my hair was gray, and the house no longer echoed when I walked through it. Lily had gone away to university in the city, chasing a life that was hers and no one else's. I had learned to live with quiet, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that keeps you company. It was a Tuesday in late spring. I remember the sound of birds outside, the smell of rain lingering from the night before, and the knock. Soft, patient, unmistakable. When I opened the door, there he was. Father Thomas, older now, his back slightly bent, his eyes dim but still kind. In his hands he held an envelope. "Anna," he said, his voice trembling. "It's from him." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "From David?" He nodded. "He passed last month." This was left with his effects. "He asked that it reach you after he was gone." My knees weakened. I motioned for him to come in, but he shook his head. "I think you should read it alone," he said. "He wrote it for you, not for me." Before he left, he added softly, "He found peace, Anna. I saw it in his eyes when I last met him. Whatever storms he carried, they've finally gone quiet." He pressed the envelope into my hand and turned away, his figure disappearing into the mist that rose from the fields. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the first letter had once waited. The paper was old, the ink faded. His handwriting, the loops and angles I had memorized a lifetime ago, trembled on the page. "Anna, if this reaches you, then I am gone. Not lost, not running, just gone in the way all men must someday go. I've spent years trying to find the right words to end what I began with my silence. For a long time, I believed my leaving saved you. Now I see that it only postponed our forgiveness. I built a quiet life in the South, near the sea. I never remarried. I didn't deserve to. I lived simply, teaching children to fish, fixing boats, speaking more to God than to men. And every dawn I prayed for you and for the child I never held. When the wind came from the north, it carried the scent of rain, and I imagined it was the same storm that once beat against the hospital window the night Lily was born. I never stopped seeing your face in it, not in pain, but in strength. I kept the silver cross, the one I sent through Father Thomas. I wore it every day until last winter when I fell ill. The doctor said my heart was failing. I smiled. I told him it had been failing since the night I left you. But before I go, I need you to know what no letter could ever say properly. You were my home, even when I walked away from it. I left because I thought I could give you peace. I see now peace was never mine to give. It was yours to make. If it's not too much to ask, bury my ashes near the sea, somewhere the tide can reach, somewhere close to where you brought our daughter into the world. Let the water that once witnessed our sorrow carry what's left of me to rest. I couldn't be there for your first breath as a mother, but I will wait for your last, until we meet in peace. David." The words blurred as I read, but I didn't wipe the tears away. I let them fall one by one onto the paper. He had found his ending, and somehow he had given me mine. That night, I dreamed of him standing by the sea. The water reached his feet, and he smiled the way he used to when he thought no one was watching. Not the smile of a man proud, but of a man forgiven. When I woke, the house was filled with dawn light. I packed the letter carefully into a small wooden box, along with the silver cross and a faded photograph of us taken before everything fractured. Then I called Lily. We buried his ashes a week later. The tide was low, the air cool, the sea gentle as glass. Father Thomas performed the blessing with a voice that cracked halfway through. He looked at me once, tears slipping down the lines of his weathered face, and whispered, "He's home." Lily stood beside me, holding my hand. She was tall now, graceful with her father's quietness and my stubbornness. When the final prayer ended, she knelt and placed a single white lily on the sand. "Was he a good man?" she asked. I thought of all the things he had been: flawed, afraid, loving, lost, repentant, and said, "He tried to be." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe that's enough." After everyone left, I stayed. The sea was rising slowly, the waves whispering against the shore. I took the silver cross from around my neck and held it up to the light, It glimmered. The same small, stubborn glimmer that had survived every heartbreak, every night alone, every unanswered question. I placed it on the sand beside his ashes and whispered, "You can rest now. We both can." The tide crept closer, inch by inch, until it touched the cross and carried it away. When I returned home, the air felt lighter. Lily sat by the fire, her sketchbook open. "I started painting again," she said. "I think I'll paint the sea." "Paint it the way it looked today," I told her. "Not as it was, but as it forgives," she smiled. "I will." I stood by the window, watching the light fade. The sky was the color of forgiveness. Not bright, not dark, just honest. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel like someone waiting for an answer. I felt like someone who had finally heard it. The next morning, I found a small white shell on the windowsill. Smooth, perfect, shaped like a heart. I don't know if the tide brought it, or if Lily placed it there while I slept. I only know that when I held it, I heard the faintest sound inside, the echo of waves, the murmur of something that never really ends.